So Apple's peak performance event has finally come, and there are some pretty exciting new things to talk about. If you enjoy this video, please like, maybe even subscribe, no pressure though. So the first thing that we got right that Apple announced is the new green iPhone 13. So for the regular iPhone 13 and 13 mini, it's just called green, and I think it looks pretty nice. But for the iPhone 13 Pro, we get Alpine green, which looks a little bit more like the midnight green of the iPhone 11 Pro. And I think they look really nice. Just a small little thing that Apple threw in there. Another thing we got pretty much right is the iPad Air 5. So it has basically the exact same design as before, but it does have 5G, although weirdly it doesn't support millimeter wave 5G. So that's kind of interesting. We also did get a new purple color, but other than that, all the other colors are pretty much the same. It got the 12 megapixel ultra wide camera for center stage, which some people have really liked, so that's pretty cool. And Apple claims that its USB-C port is now 2 times faster. And then interestingly, what I didn't see coming, but there were some leaks right before the event that the iPad Air might get the M1 chip, which it did. So it does give it some extra performance definitely from what it did before, but iPadOS is still kind of limiting. But honestly, why would anybody buy an iPad Pro anymore? Especially the 11-inch iPad Pro, because it's basically the same as the iPad Air. I mean, it has the same chip now even. The only reason I can see for buying an iPad Pro is for the big one, for the bigger screen, and the mini LED display, and maybe Face ID if that's really a big thing. For some reason, it only offers 64 and 256 gigabytes of storage, which I just think that especially for the iPad Air, 64 is way too small. I think 128 is pretty much the perfect spot, and that's the one they skipped over. It is starting at $600 just like before. We also did see an update to the iPhone SE like we predicted. It also looks pretty much exactly the same, and it has 5G, but again, no millimeter wave. So Apple claims that it can get 2 extra hours of battery life because they threw the A15 Bionic chip into here, which is the same chip as in the iPhone 13s, so you're going to get some more performance and hopefully more battery life out of it. The camera hardware is exactly the same, but because of the A15, it now supports Smart HDR4 and the photographic styles. And for these slight upgrades, it's now $30 more, starting at $429 instead of the $399 like it was before. So now the big one that we didn't hear anything about hardly until right before the event, and that is the Mac Studio. Now what we heard before the event, a lot of that was right. It looks a little different than they thought. It's basically just a Mac Mini, but thicker. The Mac Studio has 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the back, along with 2 USB-A ports, Ethernet, an HDMI port, and a high-impedance headphone jack. And then on the front, there is an SD card for quickly getting files from a camera or something. And there are 2 USB-C ports on the front, which depending on which Mac you get, will either be Thunderbolt 4 on the higher end ones or just regular USB-C. You'll get those Thunderbolt 4 ports if you get the Mac Studio with the M1 Ultra, which is the new chip that they announced that is supposed to be really, really fast and everything. It's basically 2 M1 Macs that's just like fused together. So this chip is supposed to be just incredibly powerful. They were comparing it to the 27-inch iMac and even the Mac Pro. So the Mac Studio with just the M1 Max will only have regular USB-C ports on the front, but if you get it with the M1 Ultra, those USB-C ports will be Thunderbolt 4. The Mac Studio with the M1 Max starts at $19.99, and the Mac Studio with the M1 Ultra starts at $39.99. So if you go on Apple's website now, interestingly, the 27-inch iMac is no longer available, so I guess the Mac Studio is kind of replacing it. But then that means that we need a display. Well, that's the other thing that Apple announced. It's the Mac Studio display. It's basically the exact same panel from the 5K 27-inch iMac, but put into a body that looks a little bit more like a 24-inch iMac and the Pro Display XDR kind of mixed together. It is only 60 Hz and it's not mini LED, and according to Apple, it has a 500 nit brightness. The Mac Studio display has a microarray as well as a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera for center stage built in, as well as a 6-speaker setup that's supposed to support spatial audio. Now the display can support all this stuff because it has an A13 chip inside. The Mac Studio display is starting at $15.99. The Mac Studio display ships with a stand much like the stand on the iMac, but you can optionally get a VESA mount so that you can put it on basically any monitor arm. You can also get a stand that is a lot like the Pro Display XDR stand, but it's not near as much. So that's about all that Apple announced. They had a couple little things about Apple TV Plus and a couple other small things, but those are the main things. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you later.